Hot Apostle. Help us build the kingdom. Like, share, and subscribe. Good morning. And so, this is the way it goes sometimes. Occasionally I'll look back at, often I will look back at my old sermons to see what I talked about last time I had the opportunity to talk about one of these. And, Father James and I were comparing notes one day, and Father James said to me, he said, looking at one of his old sermons, he said, "I can't believe I preached this trash," And I have to say, I've had that same feeling when I've looked back at my notes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But last Sunday, if you were paying attention, if you came to Mass here at OLG, there was a theme last week of light and darkness. Remember the blind man? And the blind man was in darkness, and the light comes. Today, I hope that you picked up on this, but if you didn't, I'll kind of tease it out, I hope, is today it's life and death. Life and death. And we can't miss that in the story of Lazarus, but it was also present in the first reading. Remember from the prophet Ezekiel? You'll be in your graves, and I will call you out of the grave. And that whole idea of being called out of the grave, and even the responsorial psalm. The responsorial psalm today was Psalm number 130. One of my favorite psalms, not very long and very accessible. A beautiful, short little prayer. And it begins with these words, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." Out of the depths. Some low place. I would say a dark place, perhaps even a place of death. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplication. The psalmist is praying. He's expressing his being in this depth of fear and guilt and fear of death, maybe even a little taste of death itself. He goes on to say, if, O Lord, you would mark our iniquities, if you would mark our guilt, if you would mark our sins, if you would mark our iniquities, who could stand? And then we have this element of hope there. But with you is forgiveness. And for this you are revered. I trust in the Lord. So this idea of being in this dark, even death, out of the depths I cry to you. That was the responsorial psalm. And the second reading, again, I want to hearken back for just a moment to last Sunday. Last Sunday, it was light and darkness. St. Paul challenged us to walk in the light, to be people of the light, and seek for what is pleasing to the Lord. And this week, again, it's life and death. And so St. Paul writes to us in the letter to the Romans, the excerpt that is chosen for us, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. What does it mean to be in the flesh? The flesh is a kind of code word for our fallen nature, our tendency to sin, our weakness, ultimately our frailty that will end in being put in the tomb. That's what the flesh means. Those who are in the flesh, we could almost say alone, cannot please God. St. Paul contrasts the flesh with the Spirit, with righteousness, with faith, with life. So again, those who are in the flesh cannot please God, but you are not in the flesh. On the contrary, you are in the Spirit, if the Spirit of God dwells in you. Whoever does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. But if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is alive because of righteousness. So we see this balance again, don't we, of death and life, the flesh and the Spirit. And now we come to the gospel. The Gospel of John, there are 7 miracles that Jesus does before he arrives at the Last Supper. And this is the seventh of the miracles. This is, if you will, the greatest of his miracles, the calling of Lazarus out of death to new life. And remember, I was telling you that Father James sometimes looked at his old sermons, and so do I. Sometimes look at my old sermon and I say, who preached this trash? Who preached this? Well, sometimes I look at my old notes and I say, ooh, that was good. Did I come up with that? And so if you've heard this before, forgive me for sharing it with you again, because I do think that it teases out this story well. And so, you know what nihilism is? Nihilism is a philosophy that says that life has no inherent meaning or purpose or value. That ultimately there is nothingness, nil, nihilism. That philosophy, unfortunately, is not uncommon these days. The philosophy of nihilism, atheism is a very short step to nihilism, and nihilism is, frankly, a very short step to murder, and murder is a very short step to genocide. And so, a few years ago, I read a book called Crime and Punishment, and the main character in that book is a guy named Raskolnikov. And Raskolnikov is consumed with his own life, his petty little existence, his poverty. He is young, he has a lot of potential, he is smart, he's a college student, he's not all bad. But in the story, he's moving in the direction of all bad. He's poor and he thinks life is unfair to him. Now, the setting of this novel is Russia in the late, 1800s. And Raskolnikov is kind of a picture of the whole country, as the whole country is sliding towards socialism and communism and genocide. So Raskolnikov, who's angry because he's poor and he sees the world as unfair, and he's had to pawn to a pawnbroker his belongings. And now he sees that this pawnbroker has his stuff, and he becomes angry at her and jealous of her, and he wants her money. She doesn't deserve it. He deserves it more than she does. In his descent from not being all bad to being all bad, he has given himself permission to condemn others, to judge them, to steal from them, to lie to them, to use people, to make them less than himself. Ultimately, he will find her not worthy of life. And in his blindness and his rationalization, he decides to kill her and take his stuff back from her and take her money. Her life is meaningless to him. She is greedy. She doesn't need all of that stuff. So he makes this plan to execute her. And he's going to be clean, and it's going to be easy, and it's going to be neat, and then his problems will be solved. Well, he goes up to do that, and he fumbles and stumbles and makes a horrible mess of it. He ends up bludgeoning her to death, and it's messy and it's horrible, and he is just overwhelmed by the moment, and he runs away, and he neither gets his stuff. He doesn't prove himself smarter than her. He doesn't prove himself more powerful than her. He's worse off than he was when he started. Now, this is a long novel, one of these kind of long novels, okay? So a lot of stuff happens in this story, but he's miserable and he's tormented by his guilt. But it's not a guilt of sorrow, it's a guilt of fear, simply of being caught. So as he's being driven mad by this worry about being caught, he turns himself in. And he turns himself in, and again, it's a long story, and one of the elements of the story is, lo and behold, he meets somebody and he starts to fall in love with her. Now, he's going to end up being in Siberia, in prison, But he has this kind of change, and he falls in love with this woman, and his nihilism starts to evaporate. He starts to see that there is something good about life. There is more to life than just his narrow little selfish focus. As he falls in love, it transcends his contempt for humanity and others. And he sees his guilt, and he confesses his sin, and he desires a new life. And then he hears about the Gospels, and he discovers the story of Lazarus. And he becomes fascinated with this story of Lazarus. Raskolnikov, he has been in the depths, and he cries out to God. He has been in the dark. He has been in the flesh alone, and he calls out for new life. Jesus calls Lazarus out of the depths. He imagines Jesus calling him from out of the depths. Raskolnikov is an extreme example, but we all fall short of the glory of God. If we say we have not sinned, we are a liar. That's quoting the Bible. And all sin is wrong. Not all sin is necessarily deadly. Lazarus is an ordinary example who got sick and died. But Lazarus too will have to be called out of the tomb. This season is a season of renewal. It's a season of new life. It's a season to call out to God from the depths. It's a season to strive to be in the light. Raskolnikov loves, and like a man raised from the dead, he becomes truly penitent. He becomes truly sad for his sin. He listens to Jesus. He speaks to Jesus. He encounters Jesus, and he is reborn. He comes back to life. He knows that he must love himself, and he must love his neighbor, and he must not kill them. And so Jesus calls Raskolnikov, just as he's calling you and me, right? From death to new life. Jesus said, roll back the stone from the tomb, and he says, Lazarus, come out. He doesn't speak to us as a giant group of people. He speaks to us as individuals. He says, Michael, come out of the depths, come out of the darkness into the light for which I have created you. Jesus does not focus on people in general. He focuses on individuals, on the specific person. Like he called Lazarus from death to life, as he called Paul from darkness to light, so he calls us. Now, what is this a season of? It's a season of grace. It's a season of new life. It's a season of light. And now I'm going to talk about fasting for a second. Why? St. Augustine says, fasting cleanses the soul. It raises the mind. It subjects one's flesh to the spirit. It renders the heart contrite and humble. It scatters the darkness of the clouds of weakness. It quenches the fire of lust. It enkindles true light and chastity. Fasting and almsgiving are the two wings of prayer which enable us to fly from darkness to light. My brothers and sisters, Lent is a season of new life. It's a season of light. As Raskolnikov was called out of death to new life, so you and I are being called. It's a symbol of new life. Our goal, my brothers and sisters, is to be pleasing to God. Again, Raskolnikov is an extreme example, but all of us must turn from selfishness to the light, out of the depths. I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, if you would mark our sins, who could stand? But with you is forgiveness.